It was during the Shakespearean era that theater companies first began to be organized in economic structures that we would now recognize. Previously to that, theater was really a civic engagement. It was a matter of cities or guilds or civic groups of various kinds putting on the plays for the entire community. But during the Shakespearean era, or during the Renaissance, theater companies really began to be profit-making groups all on their own. And in England, they took a very specific form, a troupe structure. That came about because of the concern about masterless men. During the late medieval period, as it blended into the Renaissance, the greatest concern for society as a whole were people who were wandering around aimlessly, homeless, without an attached job, without an attached community. Traveling actors, like say modern-day carnival workers, were perceived as very threatening, a deep concern that because they were not responsible to anyone, they could be just rogues, vagabonds, because they had no permanent jobs, no fixed homes. It was assumed that they would be thieves, that they wanted to steal your property, maybe steal your children. There was also great concern on the part of the government that actors in particular could be out there putting on plays without sufficient control, that is, without state censorship, that could be expressing seditious sentiments, trying to overthrow the government, or heretical ideas, trying to reinstate Catholicism in England, or the combination of both, trying to reinstate Catholicism in order to overthrow the government. The solution to that was that in 1572, the Queen imposed new regulations that said that acting troupes could exist, but they had to have masters. That is, they had to have a license where a member of the aristocracy would guarantee them. Allegedly, that aristocrat was forming a troupe of actors who'd be members of his own household for his own entertainment. But of course, he couldn't pay them to perform for him every day, or he didn't need for them to perform for him every day, and he didn't want them performing pieces which had not been sufficiently rehearsed and tested. For that reason, even though they were technically his servants, they were allowed, as long as they traveled with their letters of patronage, as long as they traveled with their license, to tour to cities where they could make money, be self-supporting, and test out the productions, build up their skills as actors, so when they came back to the home of the patron in order to put on plays, they would be very well rehearsed and professional. The first such troupe licensed in the same year as the Licensing Act was the Earl of Leicester's Men. James Burbage, whom we've already met as the man who built the building called the Theatre, was a member of that first troupe, and so he became the first prominent theatrical founder of a theatrical family during the Elizabethan age. In 1576, as we know, he decided that it was a good idea to try to build a permanent home in London, a building which he named the Theatre. We would now think of that as an extremely obvious name, but it actually is the first use of a new word in the English language, and is probably a mistake. It's thought that he had a little bit of Greek and maybe wanted to be saying the Greek term theatron, or seeing place. The Earl of Leicester died in 1588, and therefore his troupe was suddenly stranded because they no longer had a patron, a very dangerous situation for them. But by that time, other troupes had become organized, and a very prominent one was under the patronage of Lord Strange. So much of the troupe of Earl of Leicester's men just moved over directly and became part of Lord Strange's men. That was a good solution for 6 years until Lord Strange also died. And then that company was left essentially without a patron, but had most of the best trained and most prominent actors in England at the time as members. That group of actors found a new patron in 1594 in Henry Carey, who was by title Lord Hunsdon and by occupation the Lord Chamberlain, a kind of chief of staff for the Queen. At his death, his son, George Carey, the second Lord Hunsdon, decided that he would take over the patronage of the troupe, and this troupe, which was called the Lord Chamberlain's Men, temporarily became Lord Hunsdon's Men, but then in 1597, George Carey also succeeded his father in the role of Lord Chamberlain, and the troupe became the Lord Chamberlain's Men again. What's most interesting to us now, of course, is that in 1594, when this troupe was chartered, Shakespeare is listed as a charter member, that is, a co-owner of the group. This group became the most prominent acting troupe of England in the time. After the accession of James I in March of 1603, the troupe was taken directly under royal patronage, something Elizabeth had always refused to do. She liked having actors around her, but she didn't want to take the blame, didn't want to have the hassle of fighting the Puritans. James was not so cautious. He adopted the troupe directly, and he named them the King's Men. It's the business arrangements of this troupe that we're very interested in. When the group reorganized under Lord Hunsdon and became the Lord Chamberlain's Men, James Burbage had already died, but he was succeeded by his two sons, both members of the business, though only Richard was an actor. Richard and Cuthbert took on the new troupe, but they apparently didn't have sufficient finances in order to be the sole owners. That is, they couldn't supply enough cash in order to operate their company. So they took on 5 other actors as half-partners. So that means that Richard and Cuthbert owned 25% of the company each. That is, the brothers owned half of this new company. And each of those 5 partners was taking on 10% of the remaining share, excuse me, they were taking on 1/5 of the remaining share, which becomes 10% of the total of the company. This group of men were called sharers. We would now call this business arrangement a cooperative, and it was a group in which they each had to put up some cash in order to operate the company, but after they met their expenses, which included paying hired men, actors who were not sharers but were just salaried men, to take on some additional parts, then with whatever money was left over, that was pure profit, and they split it. The Lord Chamberlain's Men were rivaled by a second company called the Lord Admiral's Men. This group was under the patronage of Lord Howard, who was England's Lord High Admiral. The real backer of this company, however, was Philip Henslowe, who we've already met because of Henslowe's diary, that statement of accounts that tells us so much about how his particular theater company was operated. The principal actor of that company was Edward Allen, or Alleyn, who became a very, very wealthy man, wealthy enough to found a college at Cambridge, which has his papers. Very interesting records of him being an actor, including some scripts, some cue scripts, part scripts that he acted from as an actor, and he kept all of his father-in-law, Philip Henslowe's, records. That's a very quick overview to just give you an idea of the evolution and the structure of acting companies of the time.